Adolf Hitler had warned his generals. The war against the Soviet Union would be something else, completely different from any previous campaign. The special duties had been supervised by Himmler, who had full power in Russia and had ordered the extermination of all Jews, women and children, from newborn babies to the elderly. All previous debate was set aside, as the genocide of the Soviet Jews by their hundreds of thousands marked the first step towards the final solution, the Nazi program to exterminate all of Europe's Jews.
By September of 1941, it's estimated that at least 60,000 troops, Einsatzgruppen, Ordnungspolizei, police battalions, Waffen-SS units, local militia auxiliaries police are involved in the mass murder of the Jews. This is a vast killing force, and that is why they managed to murder nearly 1 million Jews in just a few months. It's not because they're so clever or they're so efficient, it's because there are so many of them. And it's because the Jews have nowhere to run. It's because the speed of the advance traps the Jews. They are bottled up, they are contained. It's like shooting fish in a barrel.
The number of Jews who are now being killed was escalating massively, so that you're now into total genocide on the territory of the Soviet Union.
They weren't the only unit systematically assassinating Jews in the occupied Soviet Union. There were several others too. The Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet territories were backed up by brigades of the Ordnungspolizei, a branch of the German police.
The Einsatzgruppen were still themselves relatively small compared with the police units that were much bigger in scale than the Einsatzgruppen. And Himmler got a big expansion in the number of police units sent out to the east, to Russia. And more police meant more killing. And more killing meant, in the mainstream, more Jews who were being killed.
So you have all of these organizations, to some extent, cooperating, and to some extent competing with each other to carry out Hitler's wishes and Himmler's orders.
And then there were thousands of local supporters in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Estonia. Thousands of them joined the German police to lend a hand.
It wouldn't have been possible without a great deal of help from the local population.
They discover that they can enlist and recruit and use local populations to do part of this. And so that's crucial for the manpower. Remember, the Einsatzgruppen are 3,000 men. And if you stretch the Einsatzgruppen from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, 3,000 men is not going to be able to kill very many people. And so it is the bringing in the native auxiliary police that really gives the massive manpower.
In the Baltic region and in the Ukraine, the Germans installed police auxiliaries recruited from the local population. And they were directly implicated in the assassination of Jews in the occupied Soviet territories. The orders came from Germany, but they were carried out by the local police. In some places, they carried out the massacres without a single German being present.
Most of the trigger pullers, most of the people doing the actual shooting, are not Germans. They're going to be the auxiliary police that are recruited. In some areas, like Lithuania and Latvia, they are already the major killers in the late summer and fall of 1941.
Without the help of these volunteers, the Einsatzgruppen would never have been able to exterminate more than 1.5 million Jews in the Soviet Union in such a short time.
Orders from Heinrich on the 2nd of July 1941. This should be carried out with unequaled brutality. Hitler was always surrounded by fanatics ready to transform his delusions into concrete measures.
Who could ever believe you could take a whole people and totally exterminate them, simply out of a racist ideology? But little by little, the truth came out.
When the news of the massacres broke, nobody could believe it. It took a while to take it in. How could anyone just start killing so much just like that? Why? Most Jews in Israel had family in Europe. When they heard the news, they were wondering if they had anyone left, where it had happened, what exactly had gone on. Just the thought that they'd all been killed, it was completely inhuman. Nobody could believe they'd killed children, thrown them alive into the river, disemboweled pregnant women. They didn't want to believe it.
The Swiss had sent a medical mission with the Germans to the Eastern Front. They saw concrete examples of the extermination and reported it when they got back. The press was obviously censored from publishing too many details about the Nazis' extermination campaign. We have to face it now. There were Swiss organizations who had clear proof and knew about it. It's very difficult today to say we didn't know.
The Einsatzgruppen reports, it gives a fairly clear view of what those units did and where they were.
Einsatzgruppen reports were coming in every day. At such and such a place, we killed so many Jews. Daily details of what was going on. The Einsatzgruppen used code words. They didn't write, "We killed this number of Jews." They wrote, "We took them for special treatment." But the police, on the other hand, wrote, "Today, at such and such a place, we killed 1,000 Jews." To the point where they were being told, "Be careful, put it some other way."
From the summer of 1941, British intelligence decoded some of the communications between police chiefs and the SS and Berlin headquarters.
Churchill was getting daily and weekly translations of messages sent from German police units in Russia back to their headquarters in Berlin. And in these reports, they record the number of Jews they are killing. Churchill quite often would take his red pencil and draw a circle around the numbers. He noticed these extraordinary figures, hundreds, thousands.
It's certain that both American and British leaders knew very early on about the Einsatzgruppen massacres.
It is quite clear that in the summer and the autumn of 1941, the highest levels of the Allied leadership knew that the Germans were engaged in mass slaughter of innocent people, mainly Jews, on the Eastern Front.
Roosevelt certainly received information about Nazi shootings of Jews relatively early, but the British had had this information within days of the executions, and Winston Churchill were not sharing that with the United States at the time. The United States did not have what the British had.
Officials in the Allied camp saw this genocide that was going on as the abuses of an occupying force and refused to recognize the specifically Jewish nature of the atrocities, or else they took them as pogroms, since there had been so many of them. They had been perfectly well informed that it wasn't a pogrom, but something more specific. What's more, Churchill used this extraordinary expression on the BBC, "We are in the presence of a crime without a name." In other words, not even he would name it. He knew, though, that it was an exceptional horror, never before seen in history, with no precedent.
He makes a speech in which he refers to the slaughter of innocent people by German police units.
He talked about Russian patriots being slaughtered, but not Jews. Churchill did not think it was a good idea to emphasize Jewish victims.
He didn't want to threaten retaliation because that would give Goebbels exactly the propaganda victory he wanted. It would allow Goebbels to say, Churchill is fighting this war for the Jews. So Churchill has to remain silent. There is nothing he can do, and there is nothing that he can say. And a similar dynamic is working in Washington.
In the first months of Barbarossa, the German assault had wiped out the Russian defenses. But Stalin soon revealed himself to be a tenacious and unifying leader. Russians everywhere fought back with all the energy of despair. Their fierce and effective resistance rapidly caused problems for the Germans. Knowing that the Nazis had come to enslave them only increased their determination.
A lot of soldiers came home from the East on leave, and rumours started going round in Germany about what they called the final solution. A lot of people were aware that Jews were systematically being killed.
Many Germans at home knew that the invasion of Russia had been accompanied by slaughter on an absolutely massive scale.
People gossip, they talk, it's impossible not to say it. It was supposedly streng verboten, I mean, absolutely not to be done. A geheime Reichssache is supposed to be not speaking about this at all, because it's a state secret, but people spoke.
I have to tell you something. 2 days ago, I took part in a mass killing. My hands were shaking a bit as I fired, but you get used to it. I aimed calmly and fired accurately at a lot of women, children and babies. I've never seen so much blood, gore and flesh. I kept thinking how I too have 2 babies at home that this mob would treat just the same, if not 10 times worse. Human life means nothing here. At dinner, I heard that there had already been 27,000 Jews shot in our district and 24,000 in Kiev. But that is enough for today, or you will be thinking I'm a bloodthirsty man.
These young men were writing about what they saw, including the mass murder of the Jews. We know from the diaries that they kept, their personal diaries, that they were seeing things.
One interesting thing is that there were very frequent orders from everywhere not to photograph the executions, yet everybody did it. A German soldier's wallet was 30% pornography, 30% family photos, and 30% photos of the massacres.
Everyone who worked in some way with the Einsatzgruppen had some idea what their job was. They could see the people coming back with blood-spattered uniforms.
People could have known if they wanted to know. They had enough information floating around, particularly about the massacres in Russia, but most people didn't want to know.
Vor der Kaserne, vor dem großen Tor, stand eine Laterne und steht sie noch davor. So wollen wir uns da wiedersehen, bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen. Unsere beiden Schatten sahen wie einer aus, dass wir
The 19th of September 1941. From that day on, you had to wear the yellow star, the Star of David with 6 branches. That cloth of yellow, which was in the Middle Ages the distinctive colour of Jews, of the evil to be avoided. How many times, when I had to sew another star on an item of clothing, did I examine it minutely, every stitch of it, every printing irregularity of the black ink.
Sie haben ja jetzt den Judenstern gesehen. Und viele kommen nun entsetzt und sagen, um Gottes Willen, so viele Juden habe ich ja noch nie in Köln gesehen, wie jetzt auf einmal. Also der Judenstern war schon höchst angebracht. Adolf Hitler hat gesagt, und zwar in einer Rede vor diesem Krieg, Ende dieses Krieges sein die völlige Austreibung der Juden aus Europa.
The Jews were all gathered into the same buildings and had to stay there after 8 in the evening. Every day they came up with new ways to slowly grind us down. No radios, no telephones, no theatres, cinemas, concerts. We weren't to go into museums, libraries, restaurants, railway stations or even public parks. We couldn't buy newspapers, flowers, coffee or fruit. We couldn't go to the hairdressers, own a typewriter, a bicycle, a chaise longue, or keep a dog, a cat or a bird.
When Hitler agrees to the deportation of Reichsjuden, Jews from the Reich, from Germany, from Austria, the process of deportation is already quite elaborate. It's quite well thought out. Eichmann has had a great deal of practice now, deporting people to Poland, deporting people in Poland, sending people from Germany into France. He is familiar with the technique of how you inform Jews that they are to be deported, how you gather them together at deportation points, and how you arrange transport to ship them from A to B. He also knows that it is important to the Reich that the property of the Jews is taken from them, that the apartments that they leave behind are sealed, that the contents of these apartments are evaluated, and that proper measures are taken to dispose of these apartments and the property to the benefit of the Reich.
And when the Jews were deported, most non-Jews remained silent. It's crazy, really. You can't even find a single word about it in their diaries. Very few people actually noted that they were coming for their Jewish neighbors.
They were not so separated from the German population as sometimes we think, and that makes it easier to believe in what I believe is a fiction, that people could not know about the murder of the Jews. If they're living around you, if they're still in your neighbor, if they're still in your same apartment house, and then they're being sent off, it's harder to not think about this.
They had Jewish neighbors. They knew their neighbors disappeared. Something happened to them.
They got a note in the mail saying, you are to report to the train station at this day, at this time. They were told exactly what they were to bring, and they were to show up at a certain time at the train station in downtown Cologne, to be assembled and then be sent to the east.
Everyone could see they were being deported from German cities.
Most often, the deportations were done right in plain sight of day, usually in the light of day in Germany. It's not in night and fog. People were screaming at the Jews often as they were walking. Jews of the city were marched to the train station with their bag, and so then they met other Jews from other places. And so you could say, these Jews are going, they're being sent off, there's guys with guns and guards and dogs and so on, taking these last Jews off, and there's no more Jews around.
At the deportation points, which they prepare for embarkation onto the trains, there are tables with officials who take from them forms in which are listed their property, their personal belongings, their money, their assets, and they sign these things over to the Reich. A law had already been passed that as soon as a Jew leaves the Reich, they cease to have any German nationality or any rights within the Reich, and all their property can be taken away from them. So that as soon as they crossed over the border, anything they owned became the property of the Third Reich. This was the result of a systematic process of plunder, despoliation, theft that had, of course, been going on in the Third Reich since 1936, 1937. Sometimes it is called Aryanization. In truth, it was simply theft. These Jews were robbed before they were deported or before they were murdered.
When the deportations to the east began in Berlin and in Germany, Bishop Lichtenberg said, "The Jews we are deporting are also our brothers and sisters. Let us pray for the Jews." So, two ladies in his congregation denounced him to the Gestapo. He died on the way to Dachau. He was treated so badly that he died on the way. He's the only one we know of who, publicly, in person, in his sermons or in his prayers, in front of everyone, said, "Pray for the Jews."
We have an enormous number of reports from railway workers who saw these packed trains leaving to various destinations and coming back empty. The information was all there at the time.
Over 50 trains of Jews are sent. 6 of them are killed on arrival. And that goes off, and it clearly has been approved. There is no dispute following that. But it seems that word got back and people talked. This is the first time in which German Jews, as opposed to Russian Jews and Polish Jews, have been killed in mass.
Eichmann was going to the east to arrange for the shipment of tens of thousands of Reich Jews in the east, where they would be held, because Hitler expressly ordered those Jews were not to be murdered.
He realized he had to slow, he had to back down and retreat a bit and figure out a less conspicuous way to kill German Jews. Other Jews you could kill pretty quickly, but German Jews was a more sensitive issue. That was one that rumors spread more quickly about, that people in Germany might be more concerned about. And so when the train is about to leave Berlin for Riga, Himmler talks with Heydrich on the telephone, and they agree that they won't liquidate that transport. Himmler then sends a message to Riga, Jewish transport from Berlin, no liquidation. You're not supposed to do anything until you have my approval. But the message gets there too late. They decide to carrying out Bloody Sunday massacre at Riga. This transport arrives on the same day, and he just marches them from the train right to the same Rumbala pits where he's killing 25,000, 30,000 Riga Jews. And they're shot at the same time.
Ever since 6 in the morning, 1,000-strong columns in ranks of 5 were being marched out of the ghetto. The sick, the handicapped, and the elderly were taken in vans. Some stopped along the way, refusing to go on. The shouting guards beat them and shot them on sight. The last column left the ghetto towards midday. The deserted houses were again searched for any Jews who might still be hiding. The German police chief gave the order to take any Jewish patients from the hospital, line them up in the street, and shoot them in the head. The first Jews to be killed at Rumbula, though, were not from Riga. They were German. They'd arrived by train from Germany during the night. They were exterminated that morning in Rumbula before the columns of Jews from Riga got there.
Himmler envoie un télégramme, même deux télégrammes.
Himmler sent a telegram, 2 in fact, absolutely furious because Jews deported from Germany had been killed, shot, without him giving the order.
The head of the higher SS and police goes back to Berlin, and according to his conversation, Himmler and he talked and said, how are we going to kill the German Jews? And Himmler says, well, I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to kill them. Do I chase them into the swamp, or do we shoot them? And they sort of say, well, shoot them in small batches. Big execution is too much attention. But if we shoot them in small batches, nobody in Germany is going to notice. It was doing it too spectacularly. It was doing it on too large a scale, so that they will continue, in fact, to kill some of the German Jews that arrive, but not all of them. So in a sense, they are trying to make it harder to keep track of the German Jews. You send them from the city to Riga. A next collection of trains is sent to Minsk, where they are not killed. They're put into the ghetto. Some of the trains are going to Poland. They go to a ghetto, and they sit there for a while. One transport of all of those, one transport went to Warsaw. Very unusual.
The first victims were the German Jews. They'd been put in the ghetto in Warsaw beyond anyone's help. Tens of thousands of poor souls died of hunger and typhus in grim, disgustingly filthy hovels, abandoned. The living shared their beds with the dead, praying every night for death to come to them too. They were no longer human. They were the living dead, spectres, sacks of skin and bone. These spectres, they didn't care what was going to happen to them. They knew they were condemned to death.
Previous vision of solving the Jewish question by expelling the Jews somewhere, no matter how many people die in the process, no matter how much decimation takes place, it is still a vision of expulsion. is replaced now with the vision, we are locking the gates, we are keeping the Jews in because we want to kill them all and we want to kill as many as we can.
Hitler was pushing Himmler and Heinrich to do a feasibility study on the liquidation of the Jews in Europe. He approved their proposition of mass deportations to death camps in Poland. For the first time, ordering a radicalization of anti-Jewish policy, he speaks with a rare clarity.
By the end of 1941, you have had hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews killed, but the mass killing hasn't really begun in Poland yet.
Hitler's way of operating, right from the beginning, had been not to get too mixed up in the details of what was going on. He provided then the imperative, the framework, the guidelines for action, removal of the Jews.
Nazis have begun to realize how they are going to solve the Jewish question in Poland. In the Soviet Union, you're killing people by massacre, by gunfire. You can't do that. If they are going to extend the killing, they have to think up a different way to do it.
The SS were already pretty experienced exterminating Jews. In the USSR, they'd killed them by firing squad.
The Nazis killed by sending the killers out to the victims. They killed them one by one, bullet by bullet, town by town, village by village, hamlet by hamlet. This created a couple of problems for the Nazis that were acute.
It's very clear they can't do that by firing squad. You can't simply line Jews up on the Seine River and shoot them and have bodies floating down the river to the sea.
Himmler, head of the SS, had said, the Nazi mission is necessary and beautiful and noble, but it is difficult, because it's difficult to kill. One has to convince oneself that what one has before one is not a human being, but an irreconcilable enemy of the Nordic race, someone who desires your death.
And standing beside him was the Supreme Chief of the SS and the police, von den Berg-Zelewski. And he said, just look at the Einsatzgruppen. We've made assassins of them. Is that what we train them for? And Himmler said, we must find another means of extermination. So, after a few months, he concluded that the daily mass executions might well become psychologically damaging to his troops. So he gave the order to find other, more effective methods of slaughter that would spare his men. What he required was a method that was not only more humane for his men, but was also quicker.
The head of the criminal police remembers having almost perished in his garage because he fell asleep very drunk coming home from a party, and he left his car running and the carbon monoxide almost killed him. And so he instructs the scientist, the chemist in his crime lab to experiment in this with using carbon monoxide from internal combustion engines, backing up a truck and a car to a cellar where they've put Russian mentally ill patients they've got out of an asylum, test it and find out that it works very well. So they are basically going to see if a different way of killing by carbon monoxide works, and that is by using the exhaust gas of internal combustion engines.
That's where the idea of using gas came from. They started developing some vans that use gas, closed vehicles disguised as ambulances. The exhaust pipe was routed into the van, and the engine pumped in the carbon monoxide.
He comes back to Berlin and talks to Heydrich, and they then test this, create a prototype, create a gas van in which you have a sealed compartment on a truck. You divert the exhaust gas into the truck and lock the doors and put people in, lock the doors, and they test that on Russian prisoners of war in Sachsenhausen. It works very lethally, and Heydrich orders the first 30 of these trucks to be built.
They started using these gas vans at the end of 1941 in the USSR, and the people inside them died.
The gas vans, where you pumped the gas into a sealed space full of people, soon proved impractical. They were too small. They kept breaking down. Worst of all, they just couldn't get around because the roads weren't good.
The vans got completely bogged down when it rained. They were unusable. The executions were usually 10 or 15 kilometers away from the main roads. If you took people to their execution on foot, they'd pretty soon understand what was going on, and that was best avoided. I had the vans done up as caravans with a little window on each side like you see on little country houses. But people started to spot them so quickly that they became known as death vans. Disguising them like that, I don't reckon it could ever have stopped them being spotted for long.
Up until then, there has been gassing. The first victims of gassing in Germany are German mentally and physically handicapped.
The euthanasia program, codenamed T4, began secretly in October 1939. All the medical institutions became killing centers under the supervision of both doctors and chiefs of police. Under the T4 program, some 70,000 mental patients in psychiatric institutions were killed between the start of the war and August 1941.
It was not part of the war against the Jews. T4 was part of the Nazi racial vision. That is, for the Nazis, not only were Jews an external threat, but there is a racial internal threat to Germany by defective Germans who will pass on defective genes.
Hitler had decided that there should be no mental patients in Germany. He had any incurable cases exterminated. There were medical protocols. A team of 3 doctors would declare someone incurable, and that person would be processed. They'd be shut up in a sealed room, carbon monoxide would be introduced, and they'd be asphyxiated. There'd be a crematorium right there to burn the bodies.
The murder of mental patients was the first of the German regime's mass murders of its citizens. This was before the Jews were wiped out, and you could see how the German people reacted to it.
In den letzten 70 Jahren hat sich unser Volk 50% vermehrt, während die Zahl der Erbkranken im gleichen Zeitraum 450% gestiegen ist. Wenn diese Entwicklung so weiterliefe, würde schon in 50 Jahren auf 4 gesunde Menschen ein Erbkranker kommen. Ein endloser Zug des Grauens würde in die Nation hineinmarschieren, maßloses Elend über ein wertvolles Volk kommen, das dann mit Riesenschritten seinem Ende entgegenginge. Sahen so aus. Die tiefer stehen als jedes Tier. Wer solche Wesen gesehen hat, der wird wohl nicht mehr behaupten können, dass die Verhinderung zur Entstehung solcher Wesen nicht human wäre.
If you allow the mentally and physically handicapped to reproduce, and to have further Germans who are considered a liability or considered defective, then Germany will not, in the mind of eugenicists, be as strong a race as they would be.
Private, charitable religious hospices, both Catholic and Protestant, started killing relentlessly.
Most people said nothing. And the fact that there was no outcry, even if it was their own parents, could only mean one thing. As long as it was happening to other people, the protest would be half-hearted.
The number of protests were limited and were confined to only a small number of church leaders.
In August 1941, Bishop Clemens von Galen took the pulpit to pronounce that the killing of the mentally ill is criminal, and I shall file a lawsuit against the Nazi Party. He got away with it because when the question arose as to whether he should be executed, Hitler said, "No, we don't want thousands of Catholics on our backs for executing a bishop." So an anonymous Jew wrote to Galen saying, Eminence, we admire your heroism in defending the mental patients that they're murdering. Could you say a word on behalf of the Jews? Naturally, Gallen didn't reply.
Many of the German leaders, many of the German church leaders themselves were anti-Semitic in one form or another.
Bishop Gallen, like all the others, never lifted a finger or said a word in defense of the Jews. Someone was ready to speak up for the mentally ill, the German ones, but for the Jews, no one.
The Jews were a disliked minority. They were outsiders in the society, whereas the euthanasia victims were, in a way, insiders.
Hitler didn't want to offend the Catholic Church before the war was over, before the so-called victory. Hence the order to end the euthanasia in August 1941.
This T4 action was stopped. The personnel who'd been assembled to work out extermination techniques, including methods of gassing, which they've been experimenting with. These personnel were then transferred in summer and autumn of 1941 to the east.
That personnel is available, and that will become part of the personnel for Operation Reinhardt.
Operation Reinhardt was the code name of the German plan to exterminate the 2 million Jews living in German-occupied Poland. This was when the genocide of the Jews became industrialized, with the establishment of mass killing grounds. The decision for the construction of extermination camps was made shortly after the order to deport German Jews to the east. It was the first major step towards what the Nazis called the final solution to the Jewish question.
Himmler appointed Globocnik, chief of police and the SS in Lublin, to run Operation Reinhardt.
Globocnik was a central, fundamental figure in the program. He was a radically anti-Semitic official. He was energetic and ambitious, and very close to Himmler.
Lublin was the logistical center. Globocnik had decided it would all start there. Lublin would be a sort of experimental base where the SS would be trained in the quickest and most efficient manner of killing the Jews of the Lublin ghetto.
Christian Wirth, who runs the Operation Reinhardt camp, takes 2 peasant huts, seals them up, so you now have a stationary gas chamber as opposed to a gas fan, connect it to an internal combustion engine, and he tests this on people, and that works too. Globocnik contacts Himmler and says, I have important things I have to come discuss with you. When can we meet? And Himmler then gives the okay. We have one of the men in the Lublin district writing, we could now use this for all Poland. I mean, nobody had tried this kind of method of mass killing before.
And that's how, during the autumn of 1941, the seeds of the exterminations in the gas chambers gradually germinated.
These proposals then are approved by Hitler, and by late October, the idea of creating death camps and bringing the Jews to the death camps to be killed in gas chambers is now an idea they're going to try out.
The turning point in the Holocaust is the moment when they went from mobile killing units to death camps. You make the victims mobile and the killing centers stationary. What made the victims mobile were the railroad cars, the wagons, the trains. And what made the killing centers stationary was using of the death camp with its gas chambers.
And that leads to the decision to build bell jets. That will lead to the first sort of stationary camp using carbon monoxide gas.
Once the decision was made to exterminate with Operation Reinhardt, the team of euthanasia experts arrived. They were placed under the command of Globocnik in Lublin and sent off to Belzec. Belzec was on the busy railway line from Warsaw to Lublin. It was the perfect place, strategically speaking, and it was chosen as the site of the first extermination camp. The camp at Belzec had one very precise mission: to exterminate Jews. Once this was achieved, the camp would be of no further use. They started building the Sobibor camp near Lublin, and then the Treblinka camp. This meant that Operat planned to annihilate the Jews had three camps available: Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka.
For the logistics, what they wanted was camps closest to the ghetto, so you had the smallest trip. So Treblinka is built very close to Warsaw, Helmno very close to Łódź, Belzec and Sobibor and Belzec are between Galicia, 500,000 Jews, so that this presented the smallest train ride from ghetto to death camp. So a number of local camps next to what they considered the key centers of Jewish population. You could build these small camps very quickly. It didn't take much material. And it meant that the train could go from Warsaw to Treblinka and back and is ready to load the next day. It's a shuttle. It just goes back and forth. So from that point of view, these were very practical to have a series of small camps. The train from Łódź to Helmno was a couple of hours at most, so that you could shuttle people day after day from ghetto to camp and be ready for another entire deportation the following day.
Besides Christian Wörth in the Lublin region, there were 92 Operation T4 administrators.
At each camp, there was a German staff of 20 or 30, no more. At Belzec, as well as Sobibor and Treblinka. Most of them were members of the euthanasia operation. There were also between 100 and 120 Ukrainians at each camp, volunteer auxiliaries to the Germans. They were based at the Travniki camp outside Lublin, where they were given the black uniform of the Travnikis and sent off to one of the camps.
There were 50,000 of them at their training camp, all different nationalities, mostly Ukrainians and Lithuanians, all trained up and ready to go.
They all signed a confidentiality agreement, promising never to tell of what they saw in the camps and what went on there. Operation Reinhardt to annihilate the Jews had to remain a secret.
They were very important units, and without them, Globocnik would definitely never have been able to organize so efficiently the logistics of exterminating the Jews.
The first gas chambers at the camp were in a wooden building where you could kill up to 700 people at a time. Belzec was supposed to be a sort of laboratory. They had to try everything to find the most efficient mass-killing methods.
They are trying to invent a new way of mass murder. This is when they're going to create a camp at Helmno. Construction begins there in the fall. So that we're going to have prototype camps to see, does this work? No one's done this before. Somebody has to test it.
Helmno goes into operation at the beginning of December 1941, the very first camp using gas to exterminate Jews.
And then, in fact, they loaded the gas van there, drove it into the forest where there's no houses at all, deep into the forest where the mass graves were.
The first mass exterminations took place at Chelmno, of Jews from Lodz. They were forced to strip and loaded into vans that had been roughly transformed into gas chambers. The driver started the motor running, and they were asphyxiated during the 4-kilometer drive from the village to the forest. They were all dead in 4 minutes. When they got there, anyone not yet dead was shot. Jewish prisoners unloaded the bodies and threw them into pits that had been dug in the clearing. Another team had to sort the clothes and valuables that were then taken back to Germany.
But most of Polish Jewry basically is, in a sense, still alive.
Hitler never changed his strategy for the Jews. He sometimes made tactical withdrawals if circumstance required, but the systematic extermination of the Jews in the conquered Soviet territories marked the end of any second thoughts.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
America's entry into the war transforms the situation in the most extraordinary and tragic way for the Jews in Europe. Because Hitler had said, if the war becomes a global war, then the Jews will pay. The Jews will be exterminated.
Hitler took the decision to annihilate the Jews between the 12th and 18th of December 1941. But he left it entirely up to the experts on the Jewish question, Himmler and Heydrich, to plan the whole thing.
Organized on the initiative of Himmler and Heinrich, the Wannsee Conference brought together in a villa in the Berlin suburbs 15 senior officials of the Reich to debate the logistics of the final solution. The deportation of German Jews had begun. Jews were being massacred in the USSR. Chelmno was functioning, and the other death camps were being prepared.
The Wannsee Conference was held in January 1942. Already almost 1 million Jews had been killed in the Soviet Union. So to say that they decided at Wannsee to annihilate the Jews is just ridiculous.
The Wannsee Conference has been mistakenly called the conference at which they decided on the final solution. We know, of course, from Heydrich's opening speech, as he says, the Fuhrer has already decided. This is not a conference at which a decision for the fate of European Jewry is made. If one looks back a half year earlier, when Goering signs his authorization for Reinhard Heydrich, and says Heydrich is to plan a solution to the Jewish question in the German sphere of Europe. How are you going to make up a procedure to get Jews out of countries? How are you going to decide who will stay for labor? And Wannsee is where they are brought in to ensure that they will participate and that Heydrich will be able to count upon their participation.
They discussed how to do it in the most efficient and rapid way.
So when it comes now to deciding how you're going to deal with the Jews of Central and Western Europe, that is, you are going to create a program that concentrates them, puts them on trains and ships them to death camps, who is the expert for doing that? Is Adolf Eichmann. And Heydrich puts him basically in charge of this. Eichmann prepares for Heydrich a list of the number of Jews in each European country, even countries that the Germans haven't occupied yet, Switzerland, Finland, Great Britain. So in theory, when they win the wars, they expect, they're going to take Jews from all of these countries.
He was the secretary of the conference. It was him who took all the notes and the minutes of the conference for his report, which records the Nazi authorities' estimate of about 11 or 12 million Jews. Because this mass extermination only made sense if it was total.
He's one of the key problem solvers for Heydrich to figure out how is this deportation program going to be set up.
His was a central role. It was he who would coordinate the final solution in Europe.
But it still takes some time to complete building all of the facilities, the mass murder camps. And it also takes time to set up the administrative structure.
Between January and June of 1942, construction of the extermination camps was completed. According to orders from Berlin, no expense was to be spared to settle this problem. The bureaucratic machinery functioned pretty much automatically. Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were to concentrate solely on killing. No inmates were to live there. Everyone had to be killed.
One visits Treblinka or Sobibor or Belzec today, these are very small areas compared to Auschwitz. Auschwitz, of course, had a death camp component.
Auschwitz was far more complex because Auschwitz was actually 3 camps: a prison center, a death camp, Birkenau, and a series of work camps which were known as Bunomanovitz.
German companies came and built their factories around it. So you have 37 satellite camps around Auschwitz. It is basically a German zone, and there's series of fences and so forth. So no one could just wander into Birkenau. You could basically wander up to the fence in Treblinka, but you couldn't do that at Auschwitz. It's like walking through a small city. You have rows and rows of barracks and the different streets you walk down, so that you have this massive labor camp, you have a concentration camp, and one small corner of that is the death camp.
They had no intention of exterminating Jews at Auschwitz. It was only after the Wannsee Conference that they saw Auschwitz differently and made it part of their plan to eliminate Europe's Jews. That's when they started building gas chambers there.
Auschwitz was designed as the camp that would take the deportations from Western and Southern Europe. Because of its rail line connections, it was considered an area that had good rail line connections from various different directions. And most French Jews, most Dutch Jews, most Belgian Jews, most Jews, almost all Jews from Hungary, for instance, are sent to Auschwitz.
They started building gas chambers at the camp. To begin with, it was 2 houses in the village that belonged to Polish peasants. And the gas chambers were built very simply, just by putting in a sealed door. They had to break a window to throw in the gas.
And so they experiment in using what they have available, which is the fumigant to kill infestation in the barracks, something known as Cyclone B. And so they experiment on sealing up prisoners in a room and throwing in the fumigant, and it turns out it kills people as well as bugs.
Auch in verschiedenen Vernichtungslagern wurden verschiedene
Each camp had its own technology.
Partielle Technologien
At Chelmno, they mainly used gas vans.
Gaswagen verwendet, überwiegend.
At Treblinka, Belzec and Sobibor, they killed people in fixed gas chambers.
In stationären Gaskammern vernichtet.
And at Auschwitz, they used Zyklon B gas.
Der Verwendung des Gases Zyklon B.
And so all 3 of these experimented with, all 3 work, and all 3 are used at different camps.
There was a learning curve in how the genocide was implemented, and to kill so many people, especially from Western Europe, then the use of gas chambers was the most effective means.
Himmler came to visit Auschwitz. They were already discussing matters related to the Holocaust, all the details of the mass murder of Jews in the gas chambers.
It's the beginning of Auschwitz. Factories were built whose sole purpose was to reduce human bodies to ash in a minimum of time.
From early 42, big gas chambers and ovens were built at Auschwitz. The annihilation of the Jews could begin.
Soon after the Wannsee Conference, Eichmann wrote, "The Jewish question essentially comes down to a question of transport." Once Auschwitz was operational, Europe's Jews would all be sent there to be gassed. The idea of being evacuated to the east was mere camouflage for an immediate death.